Hi there, I'm Uncle Joel with Pin and Reel, and this is Star Wars 2020, a look back at the entire Skywalker Saga. So I have very fond memories of going to see this movie opening night. I went with a group of friends and we spent several hours waiting outside in front of the theater. There were a bunch of people in costume. I had my Darth Vader Force Effects lightsaber, which has sadly died since then. I had another friend who was in a Yoda mask and he had his cheap plastic lightsaber, and he and I were dueling, and a bunch of other people were, hanging out in costume and just chatting and having fun, and we're connecting with a bunch of strangers over a shared love of Star Wars. It was a great experience. We really enjoyed the movie. We had a blast with it. Unfortunately, like the past couple of movies, my opinion has deteriorated a bit. The last time I watched the movie, again, probably over a decade ago, I just didn't enjoy it as much as I once did. So, going into it now, I had the memory of it being better than episodes 1 and 2, but still not a great movie. Trying to put that aside, I'm not going to have any expectations. Let's just watch the movie and see what I think. So right off the bat, I had a problem with the opening crawl again. It talks about General Grievous kidnapping Dooku. We should have seen this. Or, if they're not going to show it, it should have been explored somehow within the movie itself, rather than just presented in the opening crawl as text. Show, don't tell. So yeah, at least for the prequel trilogy, I don't like the opening crawls. So I think I can safely say at this point, I'm not a fan of the opening crawls. Possibly that could change when I get to the original trilogy, but we'll see. Fortunately, the acting in this movie is much better than the previous ones. Still not top tier or even what I would say is good acting, but much improved over Attack of the Clones and definitely worlds better than The Phantom Menace. I've always been a fan of R2-D2. R2-D2 was my favorite character growing up and honestly still is. The only character that I think could kind of rival him is BB-8, and just because honestly BB-8's basically a knockoff of R2-D2. He's the next generation's R2-D2. That being said, I didn't really care for the way they gave R2-D2 the jet boosters so that he can fly, and gave him the electric shocker and stuff that he doesn't have in the original trilogy. If there was some way that they explained that those were damaged and so that he didn't have them in the future, that would be a little bit more acceptable for me. But for me, having the character more powerful and more capable than he is in the originals, when these take place beforehand, it doesn't really work for me. I don't like that. The dialogue is still not great. It did feel like it was a bit better, but at the same time it wasn't focused on romance or the more emotional stuff, which Lucas seems to struggle with. So it may only feel better because it's not focused on the stuff that Lucas is the worst at. But since the dialogue has been consistently poor, it didn't really surprise me when Palpatine's manipulations were very obvious and lacked a lot of subtlety that I feel like would have been very important for that kind of manipulation. It's like Lucas gets the basic idea across of he's being manipulative. He didn't have a good understanding of how manipulation works and the subtlety that is necessary for that to actually be effective. Halfway through the movie, I could already confidently say that it was much better than the previous two entries. I feel like this was the movie that Lucas set out to make to begin with, and the first two were just him going through the necessary motions in order to get to the Revenge of the Sith. So the scene where Palpatine fully reveals himself and he kills several Jedi just wasn't believable enough for me. The way he takes out several Jedi is far too easy. It is presented as though he caught them off guard and he struck them down after surprising them. But the build up to that is too obvious to what is coming that I just can't believe that any of them were actually caught off guard.
It's treason, then.
I feel like the vast majority of the story progression in the prequel trilogy happens in this movie. And as a result, there's so much interesting stuff going on that the movie feels better than it actually is. The bad dialogue and the bad acting and the bad script are overshadowed by the interesting developments and all of the deaths and the story progression that's going on. Like, there are enough interesting bits and enough compelling stuff that it overshadows the weaknesses. The weaknesses are still there, they're still evident, and I did still find them difficult, but I was more forgiving of them, because when I'd focus on, oh, hey, here's some weak acting, it would all of a sudden be, hey, this epic moment that's really cool, and it just kind of makes you forget that there was weak acting just a moment before. And there were a couple of characters in this movie that I felt were shoehorned in. It's similar to the way Lucas has done throughout the entire prequel trilogy. It's like he knew that he had to fit something in, but didn't really have the care or focus on how to do so. So characters like Bail Organa, I feel like he should have been throughout the entire trilogy and should have been built up to show why Obi-Wan, the Jedi, would have to be brought Leia to him. Whereas in this movie, I just felt like he didn't really get enough development, and so it wasn't entirely evident why he was the one that was trusted with Anakin's daughter. Similarly, having Chewbacca make a cameo appearance towards the end of the movie, it felt unnecessary. Like, why did we have to have Yoda knowing Chewie? Like, yeah, okay, that was kind of a fan service moment. And if it's purely fan service, cool, that's fine. Like, I don't really care. But from a storytelling standpoint, it's not necessary, it doesn't add anything, it doesn't really feel like it has a purpose. But again, if it's just fan service, cool. I totally accept that. I've heard a few people who don't like that Yoda used a lightsaber, but he was a Jedi, so I don't really understand that criticism. So that being said, aside from those people, I don't know anybody who disliked the Yoda versus Palpatine fight scene. Some of it was a bit crazy with all of the acrobatics, and it was a little bit difficult to believe that either of them were that spry and flexible and had that kind of dexterity. But, you know, aside from a little bit of the absurdity of it, it was just cool and fun to watch. But I think that was a great scene, regardless of the practicality or the realism of the situation. The Anakin Obi-Wan fight scene, on the other hand, I felt was a bit wonky. It had some good moments, don't get me wrong, but I feel like there was far too much reliance on the CGI. It was quite over the top, and it dragged on a little too long and was a bit melodramatic, and it just felt a bit goofy with them floating on the lava, sword fighting. And all of the, frankly, not great CGI. I feel like the fight scene would have been a lot better with less CGI and definitely less green screen and more, and the two of them going at it just near the lava, not necessarily floating on the lava fighting. Now, I was talking to a friend of mine about this, and he made an excellent point in regards to Anakin's change to Darth Vader. Now, the thing is, the way this entire trilogy is built and set up, we're supposed to care about Anakin. We're supposed to want him to be a good guy and to succeed, despite the fact that we know that he is going to fall to the dark side. His fall to the dark side should be tragic. It should be a devastating moment. However, when he fell and when he turned into Darth Vader and they showed Vader for the first time, everybody in the theater cheered. That should not be a moment for the audience to cheer. This is the moment when our hero failed and he ultimately became the villain that we want to destroy. We should not be cheering that. It is wrong that we are excited to see Darth Vader. It is wrong that we are excited when Anakin ultimately gives in completely. This should be tragic. We should care about him. We should not want this. We should want it to not happen. But the fact that this is the first moment that a lot of us really care about Anakin, because he's now Darth Vader, that to me is probably the ultimate failing of the prequel trilogy. The main focus of the entire trilogy should have been making us care about Anakin, making us want him to succeed, and then ultimately being crushed when he fails. But instead, the coolest moment for Anakin in the entire trilogy is when he becomes Darth Vader, when he becomes the villain, when he becomes evil, truly evil. And speaking of Anakin becoming evil, I had some difficulty with how Palpatine's manipulation worked and how it ultimately played out for Anakin. First off, he kept saying, "Join me, and I will help you find the power within the dark side to help protect and help keep alive the people that you care about. That was such a driving force that I feel like that still would have come up between Anakin and Palpatine, even at the end when Palpatine says, hey, you struck down your wife. There should have been a moment of, why didn't you provide me the power to protect her? Why didn't you help me? Why didn't you give me what you promised? But then on the other hand, Palpatine says, you struck down your wife. Like, maybe, just maybe that was enough for him to see, okay, well, no power that you could have given me could have stopped me from killing her, or could have kept her alive when being cut in half with a lightsaber or whatever. I find that like not the best reasoning for why he would just accept it like that, but okay, let's just go with it for now. The second difficulty I have with this is, when was he supposed to have struck down his wife? Like, he clearly remembers fighting with Obi-Wan and basically dying. Was it supposed to be some point after Obi-Wan defeated him, but before he got given a new body? Like where in the time progression is this supposed killing supposed to have taken place? I can't find a point that I can reasonably fit that in to where it makes sense that Anakin would believe that. So quick side note, it was only after I had already uploaded this video and I was editing the next video that it occurred to me that I had completely forgotten Anakin choking Padme. I have no clue how that just completely left my mind. So I do want to acknowledge that there is an explanation for Palpatine telling Vader that he had killed Padme. I'm still not crazy with that explanation, but I do want to be fair to it and acknowledge that that was there. In the next video, I will have an explanation of how I would do it a little bit differently that I feel would be a little bit better. But yeah, I wanted to take the time to acknowledge that they did have an explanation, and so it kind of nullifies some of what I just said here. And I know a lot of these questions could have been dealt with in the books. I haven't read any of the books, but I leave the books out of it completely. We're just talking about the movies. For the movies, I feel like this is not explained and it doesn't make sense. And then in the context of the overarching Skywalker saga, there is a little bit of difficulty I have with this movie, specifically the absolute rage that Anakin has towards Obi-Wan. When they meet up again in A New Hope, Vader is very calm and collected, and there is no sense of that rage there. Granted, it's been like 19 or 20 years or something like that, so yeah, okay, he would definitely have calmed down, but still, that anger would still be there. If you've gone 20 years without seeing the person that you hate, and the person who basically killed you, and then you see him again, I don't care what kind of developments you would have made, you would still be angry in that moment. Especially considering Vader didn't make developments to become a calm, collected person who's very forgiving. He leaned into the dark side and he's still a very angry person. So that doesn't really jive with me. So yeah, this movie overall was much better than episodes 1 and episode 2, but I feel like a lot of that is because of so much interesting stuff happening, not necessarily because it had better directing or better acting, just because there was more interesting stuff, more development, more story progression. As an entry in the Skywalker Saga as a whole, I feel like this is definitely one of the more significant ones, and this one definitely earns its place far more than episode 1 and even quite a bit more than episode 2. In the prequel trilogy, I feel like this movie does most of the heavy lifting. I'd say, good 80% of the major plot progression happens in this movie as opposed to the other two. And so I would have liked if that was distributed a bit more. Even if it was 50% this movie and 25% each of the other two, I would have been okay with that. Just, it feels very weighted towards episode 3. So yeah, there are some continuity issues that don't sit well with me, particularly in regards to Vader and his relationship with Palpatine, Padme, and Obi-Wan. And then stuff like R2-D2 having the jets, and then, Obi-Wan not recognizing R2-D2 later on. And I know there are fan theories for why this makes sense, and I'm sure comics and books have explained some of it. But again, We should not need extra material for continuity. And we should be able to watch the movies and have it make sense with just the movies. So yeah, this movie's much better than episodes 1 and 2, but still very flawed. And at the same time, of the prequel trilogy, it fits the most with the Skywalker Saga as a whole. So there you have it. The end of episode 3 of Star Wars 2020. A look back at the entirety of the Skywalker Saga. And until next time, this is Uncle Joel saying, stay tangible.